we take on an allotment, it's all too easy to dream of this. A beautiful, weed-free oasis full of a lot of crops and flowers and fruits and all things beautiful. But the reality is, this could take a long time to get to. The reality is you'll probably be faced with something more like this. On allotments and gardens, when we take them on, there are often a lot of perennial weeds. The worst one being horsetail. That's the ferny stuff you can see between all of this. It's difficult to get on top of. You can see one side that's been cultivated here and one side that has just had a lot of horsetail let grow. It'll even come up between your crops like this. It's prolific because its roots go so deep and it's hard to get rid of. Every time you dig it up, it's likely that the roots will break and grow again from those roots. There is no easy fix, but I've got 4 ways that you can get on top of it, and over time you will learn to live with it and it will reduce to, let's hope, almost nothing. This is when I took my allotment on. It doesn't look like there's a lot of horsetail there, but it had all been streamed back. We started by covering it, making no-dig beds and keeping on top of streaming it back. This is it now. And as you can see from this, I'm not cultivating the whole thing, and that's my first tip. I'm mowing a section, I've kept a section covered, and I'm cultivating the front half. That's because horsetail is so prolific and so hard to get on top of. I only want to do what is manageable for me, and that is half of the plot here at the front. That's where I'm growing stuff. It may be different for you and it depends on how much time you have, but really when you start off on an allotment, I would really recommend starting off on one section. Then you can expand. So covering one section, growing on one section, and even mowing a section is my best tip. And in time, you will be able to hand weed this section and cover, and it won't be so bad. Horsetail will still grow through. Don't be deceived by that. Even on no-dig beds, it will still grow through. This is an area that hasn't been hand weeded for a while, but we're going to keep hand weeding it. We're going to keep covering it, and that's how we get on top of it. And I'm going to show you how I do that. Okay, so let's identify it first. If you're not sure it's horsetail, this is what it looks like close up. It's a ferny type weed. It's pretty strong. Sometimes it grows these little cones like you can see. This is when we want to get it out really, because this is when it's at its weakest. Now most people will tell you to completely dig it out, to get all of the roots out. But the reality is, A, I'm a no-dig gardener and I'm not going to tell you to dig. B, this still isn't a fail-safe way to do it without chemicals, and I'm never going to tell you to use chemicals because horsetail will get past those as well. They'll still grow back. But by digging it, not only are we making a lot of work for ourselves, we're disturbing the soil, and we're still really going to struggle to get the whole root out. That's time consuming. And while you're doing that over one area, another area is going mad. So my best tip, and it's a tip that's been passed down to me, is to pull it rather than dig it. When you pull it like this, stretch and pull, it weakens the root when you do it. We can do this pretty quick over a large area, and then therefore you're keeping on top of this whole area and weakening the root as you do it. Each time you do it, it'll grow back less. So hand weeding and keep on top of it is the best way we can do it. Pulling it like this, stretching the weed. You can dig a tiny bit with a hori like I'm doing here to help get any smaller bits out. The smaller bits are harder to get out, so hori is good for those. These bits that have grown longer are quite easy to pull out, but it's best not to let them get this big if you can avoid it, even if it is easier. The best bit about no dig is the more you add mulch onto it, every time it has to grow through it to get to the light, and therefore it's much weaker and much easier to pull out. So every time we mulch, every time we hand weed, it's getting easier and easier. And within 2 seasons, I can tell you, there is still horsetail on my plot. There's still a lot of it, but it's getting much easier to keep on top of. Once I've hand weeded an area, I'm then, if possible, and where possible on different parts of the plot, I'm covering it. Again, even if this is area I've already cardboard and mulched, I'm doing it again. This area I'm not planning to plant on at the moment, so I've cardboarded and I'm wood chipping it. Do this as thickly as you can. Double layer of cardboard, double layer of wood chip if possible. This will make it harder and harder for the horsetail to grow through. Again, little bits will grow through, but it'll be much less and much easier every time for you to hand weed it. If this is an area that you do want to grow straight into, then you could do this with compost or manure. Again, covering as thickly as you can. The more light that's kept out, the more cardboard you put on, the better. And this is this area a couple of months later. Yes, some weeds have grown through, you can see a bit of bindweed, but the horsetail is much more under control. Whereas in this area, I didn't have enough cardboard and I just wood chipped this. And you can see the horsetail has grown through much quicker. This is only after a couple of weeks of me doing it. Much quicker, although it is easier to hand weed out, so it was better than nothing. It still is better to cardboard and wood chip or compost if you can. Okay, so that's the first way that I've kept on top of the horsetail. Number 2, the area that I'm not cultivating is to mow the area. This is great because I've decided to not cultivate this area yet. I've also left it for the kids to play, but hey, whatever you need it for. The more I mow, the more the horsetail and the other weeds don't like it, and they get weaker and weaker, whereas the grass does like being mown, so the grass gets stronger. There's still weeds in here, sure, but there's more grass than weeds, and every time I mow, it gets easier. It also doesn't take me long to mow at all, so that's great. The third tip is to keep an area covered in black plastic or a weed membrane. It's a really great way to cover an area for a season or two. The horsetail will try to grow through it. You may even see the black plastic rising underneath it, but that's okay. When you take this black plastic off, or the weed membrane off, then do your no-dig beds like we've done in the area that we've cultivated. And the same with the mown area. If you then decide to cultivate it, you can do no-dig beds on top of the grass, but you'll know that the horsetail has been significantly reduced by mowing it or by covering it, and then you'll be able to make your no-dig beds knowing that it will grow through much less. And then keep hand weeding it, always keeping on top of it. The last tip is to use a cover crop. So this borage and calendula was some that I've sown and some that has just grown itself, but I've left it in place in areas that I didn't need to grow on. That's because it's great for pollinators, and because it's growing there, the horsetail can't get through either. It's outcompeting the horsetail. So not only is it good for pollinators, it's keeping on top of the horsetail. The last question I get is whether you can compost your horsetail or not. Look, a lot of gardeners will tell you not to. They'll tell you that it will get into your compost and it will grow out. But I believe you can compost it. For me, there's just too much of it to bag up and take away. It's not possible for me, with the amount of horsetail on my plot when I took it on, to get rid of it any other way than composting it. But by turning your compost often to get a lot of heat into it and letting it cure for longer, all the horsetail will die away. And I've had no problem with compost that I've made with the horsetail and other waste from the plot and my bokashi that I put into it. And then hey, one day your plot may look like this, a Garden of Eden, horsetail free and completely no dig and organic.